Over the past 3 seasons, we debated Nikola Jokic versus Joel Embiid virtually non-stop. Who's the better player, who is more impactful, and who's the MVP? And finally, after all those debates, all those topics, we now know for sure that Nikola Jokic is the far superior player. And the only reason this opinion wasn't universal is because Jokic had his 2 best players hurt and playing without them the last 2 seasons, compared to Joel Embiid, who had much more teammate help in James Harden, Maxey, and even Tobias Harris. But finally, this year in 2023, both Embiid and Jokic had healthy squads that were ready to make a championship run. And Jokic right now is in the West Finals, and Embiid is on his couch yet again watching the Eastern Conference Finals. And when it comes to NBA superstars, I've never felt secondhand embarrassment for a player like I do for Embiid. As this year, yes, he won the MVP, but it was a disastrous season. First off, he dodged Jokic in Denver, skipping that game, opting out to play, after 3 days prior dropping 46 on the Warriors. Secondly, he begged for the MVP and was borderline crying for it after every game. And looking at the playoffs, first Brooklyn, he was average, subpar, and not playing MVP level. And even versus Boston, he was carried by James Harden for over half their wins. As in both Game 1 and Game 4, James Harden put on a virtuoso, having 40 points and numerous clutch time shots. In large part due to James Harden, they were up 3-2 heading home with a chance to close it out. But per usual, Joel Embiid absolutely folded, collapsed, and had a meltdown in Philadelphia and Boston. As in Game 6 in the 4th quarter, he was outscored by Tatum 16-6. And in Game 7 back in Boston, he was a no-show, Casper the Ghost, nowhere to be seen, MIA. Embiid did not show up in the biggest game of his life, having 15 points, 4 turnovers on 5-18 shooting, including 0-4 from 3. Embiid's offense in Game 7, it was terrible. But even worse than that, his defense, it might have been worse, because Tatum was putting this man in a blender in the pick and roll, step backs, going to the basket. He was getting whatever he wanted versus the so-called MVP. As in this game when Embiid guarded him, he had 24 points on 80% shooting and didn't miss a single 3-pointer. I was told all year long Joel Embiid was an elite defender and is so much better at defense than Jokic. If that was actually true, why was Embiid being hunted in this game in the pick and roll? Yes, offensively he was bad, that happens, but defensively, that's effort, that's intensity, and just will to win. It's really hard pressed to find an MVP who gets flat out embarrassed like this in a playoff series and a Game 7. As even Jokic last year when he lost in the first round, he didn't go out sad like this, playing awful basketball. And for Jokic that year versus the Golden State Warriors, the eventual champions, he had an excuse for not having his 2 best teammates. For Embiid, he has none. And looking at Jokic that series versus the Warriors, he averaged 31-13-6 on 58% shooting. Even the previous year versus Phoenix, when he lost, he averaged 25-13-6 on 48% shooting. My point being, when Jokic lost in the playoffs, it wasn't due to him not playing well. So for Embiid, what is his excuse? He had a healthy team, he was up 3-2, and he won the MVP. Seemingly, there is no excuse, he just played bad. What's shocking to me and many, Joel Embiid had the gall to say him and James Harden can't win alone, and that basketball is a 5-on-5 sport where everyone has to play better. The lack of self-awareness in this quote, it's simply stunning. Put this in the Louvre in the Hall of Fame, this quote should be plastered up as one of the worst quotes of all time. As Embiid in Game 7, him and Harden, they both played awful. It wasn't like he had 45 points, 20 boards, lost by 5, it was hard fought. This was a blowout and a flat-out embarrassment. I don't know what's worse, this Embiid quote or his actual play on the court in the biggest game of his life. As in this game, he was outscored by Tobias Harris and Maxey, the quote-unquote guys he needs more help from. And possibly worse than that Embiid quote was trying to quote Giannis saying there's no failures and only steps towards success. And look, for Giannis, that quote actually applies to him as he's an NBA champion, doesn't beg for MVPs, has been to the East Finals multiple times. For Joel Embiid, his playoff career, it's only failures and zero success. As 3 times in the playoffs, he's played Tatum and the Celtics, and all 3 times has lost. And let's be real for 1 second, James Harden this series, he was a roller coaster up and down, you didn't know what you were getting from him. Even with that being said, James Harden was responsible for 2 to 3 wins for Philly in this series, scoring 40 plus points and hitting timely clutch jumpers. Joel Embiid in this series had more than enough help to beat Boston and make the East Finals. But what it came down to, it was pretty simple. Tatum in this series outplayed the MVP and took his lunch, averaging more points, rebounds, assists, steals on a higher field percentage, and 3-point percentage. And of course in Game 7, had 51 points in a 25-point blowout. And while those stats are shocking, the most shocking stat is this. In the last 5 quarters of this series, 4th quarter of Game 6 and all of Game 7, Joel Embiid had 21 points to Tatum's near 70. This series was pretty simple. Jason Tatum in the big time moments rose to the occasion, compared to Embiid, who froze and shrunk. And for Joel, as a theme of his playoff resume and his entire career, as comparing him and Jokic in their playoff play this year, it's not even close. Jokic compared to Embiid is averaging 7 more points per game, more assists, boards, steals, higher field percentage, and 3-point percentage. And for Embiid, he only averaged 23.7 points the entire playoffs, down nearly 10 points from his MVP season average. And even worse than that, his rebounds, assists, field goal percentage, 3 percentage are all down. Compared to Jokic, when all those categories is getting better, averaging 6 more points than the regular season. And staying on Jokic for 1 second, looking at his last 10 playoff games, he's been phenomenal, averaging 32.5 points, 12.7 boards, 10.1 assists on otherworldly 55, 48, and 81 splits with 5 triple-doubles in 10 games. Jokic playing that phenomenal, that's amazing on its own. When you look at Joel Embiid, compare his stats to those stats, the gap in these two players, it's bigger than I actually thought. But one common theme over the past 3 years that has always been true, it's always been right, is that Jokic in the playoffs gets better compared to Embiid, who gets drastically worse. And for an MVP player, dropping 10 points in the playoffs, that's virtually unheard of, and it has to be a record for drop-off in production. And when it comes to the NBA media that was pushing Embiid so heavily over Jokic and Giannis, where are you guys now? Because last year Jokic in the playoffs, he lost to the Warriors in 5 games. He was crucified, and his playoff legacy was somehow put into question by that loss. Never mind his 2 best players not playing, they didn't care. If that's your energy for Jokic, where's the energy for Joel Embiid? Because this failure, this flameout, it's 100 times worse than any Jokic failure. And for Joel, going into next year, when it comes to winning MVP, if he averages 35 points per game, goes undefeated, that is the only way he is sniffing the award. Because no one in their right mind is voting for Joel Embiid to win MVP ever again. And look, the playoffs right now, they're not over. Jokic could lose and flame out, we never know what could happen. But at this point, these Embiid-Jokic debates we've had, it's vindication for everything we've said and every point we've made. And I'm glad it's clear to everyone right now, Nikola Jokic by far is better than Embiid, and debatably is the best in the world. And like I've said ad nauseum, when it comes to Embiid and Jokic, the biggest gap in these players, it's not the defense, it is the passing and playmaking and the IQ on the fly of when a defense doubles you. As Embiid, even versus Brooklyn, you could see, struggled big time with double teams and help out of the post, compared to Jokic, who versus Phoenix and Minnesota could not be doubled, as if he did that, he'd find open shooters, guys rolling to the rim, and lobs. And even more embarrassing for Embiid, for a guy who's nearly 300 pounds, in Game 7, he was guarded by Marcus Smart in the third quarter and did virtually nothing. That right there alone is proof Nikola Jokic is the far better player. And looking past basketball ability, scoring, efficiency, all that stuff, when it comes to Embiid and Jokic, what is Embiid's main focus over the past 3 years? It was an individual award and winning MVP, compared to Jokic, who's always been very clear that a championship is his priority. And if you say that's corny, you don't believe that, Embiid after Game 7 quite literally threw his teammates under the bus. If Jokic ever does that, I will criticize him heavily. But till this point, in my knowledge, he's not done that one time in his playoff career. It is pretty sad how Embiid went out. It was embarrassing, it was hard to watch, but as a Boston fan, I enjoyed it thoroughly. And as a Jokic fan, this debate, as I said, is over and should have been over 2 years ago. So, as always, thank you guys for watching, hope you enjoyed it. I'll see you next time.